the final QualLab lunch lecture of this semester of this year. My name is Shay Wesley Martin. I am a QualLab graduate research associate, and I'm so happy to be here welcoming Dr. John Wargo, who's associate professor at University of Michigan, for our last QualLab lunch series. If you would like, make sure that you introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're coming from and how you heard about this lunch. So this is today's agenda for our lunch. So we'll have a welcome from our director of the QualLab. I will go over housekeeping, just kind of letting you know what to expect during our time together. I'll introduce our guest speaker, who will give his lunch talk. We'll have a Q&A at the end, and then we'll let you know of some ways that you can stay involved with the QualLab.
Welcome, everyone. I am so glad you're here. And huge thank you to Shay Martin for really taking the lead on this series all academic year, as well as the entire team that is pulled together. It really is a group effort. It's a wonderful group. And I want to be really intentional about the land acknowledgement and histories. And in this current moment, where we also have important global histories and local histories that have happened over the centuries. Please try with care, educate yourselves, and I think it's real important that we provide space to honor the land and the histories that we have here in Ohio, where we have the QualLab lunch, and really give not just a shout out, but an intentional honoring of the traditional homeland of the Shawnee Potawatomi, Delaware, Miami, Peoria, Seneca, Wyandotte, Ojibwe, and other indigenous nations who have strong ties to this land. It's important with the work that you all do, with the work we all do in terms of the research that matters to people, to land, to beings. And so just need to give a moment to that. Also know it's been a particularly difficult moment for our college. We lost someone in leadership recently, and it's just the reverberations of oppression and power are just, the ripple effect is so present. So thank you for that moment. In moving forward, I also want to share the QualLab and a little bit about who we are. You know that by now, since you're here, we're so glad. And we really are a service to the college as well as beyond in putting all the information we have up on the dashboard of resources. A number of faculty and grad students will come to us to help with grants and thinking through the qualitative research designs grants or dissertations, and provide opportunity for thinking like today with the QualLab lunch. So that's a wealth of resources on all approaches, as well as we also have specific focus on research toward innovation, equity, diversity, and justice. And moving forward, I do want to mention that we do have qualitative consultation hours. If you're in EHE, it's free. If you're not, reach out to us and we'll talk about that. And we have events and all that up on the website. So as a person who's a grad at the University of Michigan PhD program, I'm really excited about today. I'm going to pass it back to Shay.
Thanks so much, Dr. Pasquet. So just some housekeeping before we jump in. So please make sure that your microphone is turned off during the presentation. Feel free to share questions or comments using the chat space. At the end of Dr. Wargo's talk, the QualLab team was going to surface questions from the chat for him. During the Q&A, you can also feel free to unmute to ask your questions. This session is being recorded and you can access it on our YouTube channel about a week after this concludes. Closed captioning is provided during the session. You can access that by clicking the CC icon on the lower right corner of your own video box. Feel free to turn it on and off as you wish. So now I get the pleasure of introducing Dr. John Michael Wargo. And so Dr. John Michael Wargo is an associate professor at the University of Michigan, a literacy researcher and learning scientist. His work reconceptualizes the role of media and technology as it comes to intersect with children's and youth critical literacy learning. At Michigan, Wargo leads the Design and Technologies for Learning Across Culture and Context MA program and is affiliate faculty with the Institute for Research on Women and Gender and the Digital Studies Institute. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Wargo, even though you're wearing that Michigan sweatshirt. The floor is now yours.
Well, thank you so much first, just to Shay, Penny, and the entire QualLab team for the invitation. So great to see so many friendly faces and folks in the audience. I'm really looking forward to today. So I'm going to quickly share my screen and just look for a confirmation that that works. Nope, you should be able to. Can you see that? Awesome. I will just provide a quick little sort of warning. This presentation does have video using first-person GoPro perspective. So if you get car sick or sort of need to look away, I completely understand. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So I'll start. So games are not only forms of documentation, communication, expression, and play, but are critical sites and technologies for learning. Indeed, as recent research illustrates, games not only further the development of domain-specific knowledge, but also provide the design constraints, analog or digital, rendered necessary to learn specific disciplinary practices. Indeed, as Kurt Squire has argued, games are both content and context for learning. So moving beyond this content or context divide, this presentation, Learning to Escape, Noticing Knowing Through Misreading and Recalibrating the Body in Play, brings together methodological insights from ethnomethodology and conversation analysis with theoretical concepts from game studies and embodied learning to reimagine the complex work undergirding showing knowing in an escape room. So to demonstrate these points, I draw on data from a larger empirical study examining how 5 undergraduates learned to escape across a series of increasingly difficult escape rooms. Today, I look at participants' interactions and peer ecologies in one of these rooms, a room we call the Artist Conundrum, to ask how might learning to read the escape room be understood as an accomplishment of knowing and interaction? And how does the room, as a design and constructed environment, serve as a mediational resource that fosters and advances participants' ability to claim and/or exhibit understanding through play? So in asking these questions, this project rejects the idea of treating the specific practices and activities of escape, like those featured here in the Artist Conundrum, as a problem to be solved. Rather, in examining the means through which participants learn to escape, I seek to recover the complexity required to understand the sophisticated forms of learning and social interaction occurring in gameplay. So for those of you who are not super familiar with escape rooms, they're also known as live escapes or puzzle rooms. And many are primarily played in analog environments, even though I know many could also be on tabletop. There's a couple on VR or PC. But it's important to sort of first qualify what I mean by game. So by game, I mean, quote, a rule-based system with a variable and quantifiable outcome where different outcomes are assigned different values. The players exert effort in order to influence the outcome. The players feel emotionally attached to that outcome, and that the consequences of that activity are negotiable. So in escaping, participants are often required to walk, lift, or sense their way towards victory and exit. Rendered as text in their own right, these rooms build on collaborative reading practices that require both encoding, decoding, and lateral thinking. As a genre of game, escape rooms use a pretty simple game loop. Challenge or puzzle, think a locked box, solution, that combination, and then reward, the contents inside that box. So a typical escape room experience may have players looking for clues hidden behind paintings or objects on the wall, listening for sonic guidance or the game master to provide a clue, or manipulating objects to progress from one challenge to another. They are known for their nonlinear orientation and reliance on this causal logic loop. But for me, I think escape rooms serve as really exemplary sites to examine how individuals learn to read the room and exhibit understanding. So theoretically, this paper takes as its starting point that learning is not merely influenced by culture, but that it is a cultural process in and of itself. Indeed, as we know, people learn in interaction with the others through participation in cultural activity and with material and conceptual tools. To examine how participants learn to escape, I understand the environment of an escape room as an interactional space. By interactional space, I draw on Schmidt and Depperman, who argue that, quote, interaction spaces are constituted by the interplay of physical circumstances, which, because of their features, have certain implications for the structuring of interaction and interactive accomplishments in which participants use these features as a resource for the situated praxis. Interaction spaces are also connected to certain structures of relevance, which are expressed, for example, through the symbolization of inclusion and exclusion. The concept interaction space describes dynamic, constantly changing constellations, which partly reveal clear spatial contours. So with this supposition guiding my work and thinking, I turned toward resources in literature and interaction analysis that helped me recognizing that play and escape room play more specifically was what Goodwin would call a multi-party interactive field, within which multiple participants are building in concert with each other the actions that define and shape the life world. So this paper traces these interactional structures of learning to escape through both the detail of embodied actions of activity, as well as the talk and text that emerge from and through it. In so doing, my goal is to theoretically highlight how participants' reading of the room exhibited sophisticated forms of involvement performed by parties within evolving structures of talk. Relying on Chuck and Candy Goodwin's concepts surrounding participation and following their embodied participation framework, I examine how this team of players learn to escape as our exhibit reflexive and co-constructed phenomena, each ushering forward demonstrations of what Helen Maylander would call trajectories of knowing in interaction. So I want to provide a bit of context. This presentation draws on data from a larger IRB-approved qualitative project examining how 5 adult undergraduates learn to escape across this series of rooms. For the purposes of this paper, I focus my analysis on the second of 3 rooms, the artist conundrum. I'll sort of stop though and pause and sort of detail briefly sort of the collaboration between my research team and the escape room company, as you'll see that we worked really in close proximity with one another. They provided us with a lot of sort of the surveillance footage that sort of is used to sort of maintain player safety, but to also provide clues. We worked with them to sort of understand the logics of the engineered experience. And really, I just say this because I was so grateful for the work that we were able to accomplish together. I don't know if I'll ever sort of find old MIT engineers who are now escape room designers to work with again. So the artist conundrum was the second of the 3 rooms that participants completed. It was composed of 15 puzzles and had an open multilinear path that you see here in this figure. It was designed as a gallery space wherein participants, acting as observers, were asked to locate clues and solve puzzles within and across varying exhibits. So for instance, they were tasked to notice visual differences in a series of Warhol-inspired Campbell soup cans. Similarly, they explored the connection between primary and secondary colors through a Mondrian-inspired painting, wherein the pressing of a button on one painting changed the color of a vase of flowers across the room on the other side. Participants escaped when they solved the meta puzzle, which was finding missing paintings and returning them to their places on the exhibit wall. Timed, as most escape rooms are, participants were tasked to escape in 60 minutes. So the team under study consisted of these 5 beautiful, wonderful undergraduates ranging in ages from 20 to 22, 3 identified as men and 2 identified as women. Collectively, they had prior experience playing together on a competitive intramural volleyball team and thus had interacted with one another in multiple team scenarios. It is important to note that they all had done escape rooms previously, but none had done them at Boxeroo, which was the site of our study. So I have to pause and provide a little bit of a confession. I am a little bit of a game nerd myself. And as a researcher of escape, I find it important to detail my initial role as a player playing this room trying to escape. So prior to participants playing, I, alongside of my fabulous doctoral students, completed each of the escape room games together. Following Arsith, we engaged in what he calls a hermeneutic feedback loop. And that consisted of 3 parts. First, playing the game. Second, doing a designed walkthrough with the engineers and builders of the game. And then 3, observing others playing. So in collaboratively navigating the rooms as a team, we analyzed our own practices and performances of play. After those set designers walked us through detailing sort of the staging mechanisms of how they sort of immerse learners in the space. And then finally, as you'll sort of see, we observed others, these 5 playing the room. But this loop is really important to detail as it provided a level of intimacy of both gameplay, of style, of idioculture, and branding of this particular group of engineers that was required for us to analyze subsequent unfolding of action and play. So to generate data of participants' experiences of escape, we video recorded their entire experience in the escape rooms using GoPros affixed to each of their heads, as well as the surveillance cameras installed throughout each of the rooms. This combination of video recording techniques allowed us to capture a large corpus of data about the participants, things like speech and noise making, vocal qualities, movement through space and in relation to one another, gesture, the direction of their gaze and focus of attention, etc. The videos, on average, lasted 57 minutes in length, and these videos also captured elements of the room, including thematic design, atmospheres, soundtrack and sound effects, lighting, multimedia features, interactional components, and the materials and objects that the room contained. So in addition to recording live play, we also conducted an audio recorded individual interviews with all 5 participants prior to their experiences in the escape room, and then group interviews immediately following each experience using a semi-structured interview protocol. So to achieve what Labov and Van Schell call good working transcripts, we combined the verbal communication and notable nonverbal behavior and interaction of all 5 participants from the GoPro video together. After, one member of the research team created an initial draft of the verbatim and phonetic transcription of what can be heard from one participant's GoPro video recording. So this initial draft was then compared to other video recordings of other participants' video. Additions and corrections were made to this initial transcription based on the new information, as well as from our subsequent recordings. So while repeated, systematic and close observation of the GoPro video and referencing transcripts form the foundation of our data analysis, the complexity and multidimensionality of the escape room ecology called for generating multiple secondary data sources of data to achieve a deeper and more nuanced understanding of how claiming and exhibiting playing or knowing mediated play across puzzles. So as a result, in the far right, you'll see we created detailed floor plans diagramming the layouts, architectural features, and design elements. And then each player was a corresponding colored dot. And so one member of the research team tracked this for every 2 seconds of play, which was a ton of work, but actually allowed us to understand sort of how players were taking up space, how sort of long they were at particular puzzles, who was talking to who, et cetera. So this was really, really helpful. So with the goal, however, of following players knowing in interaction, I turned to Goodwin's embodied participation framework to analyze how learning to escape was exhibited and interactionally accomplished across time. So in collaborative activities such as puzzle solving, participants, quote, build action by laminating different kinds of meaning-making resources together. So these actions can include the mutual orientation of the participants' bodies toward each other, what Adam Kendon would call sort of the F formation, oral language and speech. You'll hear a lot of screams and shouts in the room, but also hands making environmentally coupled gestures and other phenomena being intensely scrutinized by participants as part of the work that they're trying to accomplish together. So through what Goodwin named as, quote, epistemic ecologies, these embodied frameworks of participating helped me and my team analyze and position participants with respect to one another as knowers and doers. Goodwin argued that these forms of embodied participation can provide what he names as a public substrate, or, quote, a place where diverse semiotic resources can be brought together and accumulated through time into a public configuration. So in my analysis, I explored how embodied interaction allowed individual players and the collective team to create these public substrates of shared attention, which in turn transform not only into resources for later action, but also, as you'll see, recalibrated play, wherein other players were learning to read the room from and with one another. So today I want to spend the bulk of my time showcasing some of this emergent work in a series of 3 acts. Each demonstrate on their own, but also build to showcase particular dimensions of what it means to read the room. So this is Act 1. There is a button here. Should I press it?
There's a button here? Should I press it?
Yeah.
It's under an artifact.
Yeah.
Okay, turn green.
Oh, does that happen?
Try pressing it again.
Green again. Blue.
Maybe the order is important.
Do we do anything with color?
First.
Here's another.
Hey,
So reading the room requires, as we see here, a number of unsuccessful reading attempts. Through environmentally coupled gesture, Sam asks, quote, "There is a button here. Should I press it?" In the action of pressing, we see Sam as a potential knowing reader, recognizing a text in action that will elicit further comprehension of the puzzle sequence. Shot through Walter's first-person GoPro perspective, we see how the action provides an impetus to folks to then surround Sam and read the material arrangements around him. Pressing this button performs what Goodwin would call a noticing and signals that the button should become an object of focus for all players, summoning them into a framework of mutual orientation focused on the organization of collaborative action. This intercorporeal framework for mutual engagement, the way in which players have arranged their bodies and the material resources, provides a public substrate, a space where these diverse semiotic resources are brought together and accumulated into a public configuration that allows new action to be built upon. His inquiry at the end of the scene, "Do we need anything for colors?" is quickly dismissed as players seek to quickly move to other exhibits and puzzles, as noticed through Walter's placement of a glass bottle. So this is Act 2. Demonstrators, or lead readers, are made and unmade through directive sequences.
Oh!
Middle letter of words for.
when.
Wait, hold it. Can you hold them down?
Wheel.
Sorry.
Wheel.
Middle
Rodent.
letter of
So
word.
Wheel loving rodent.
So it's the middle.
Hamster.
A hamster.
Hamster.
Middle letter.
Okay, so
Of word.
HAMSTER. So S.
Yeah, S. So S would go here. I
So the
guess?
first, yeah, because that's lighting up that area, so that's going to be the S.
S. Okay.
And what do we need this for? The 6 letters.
So the buttons probably light up clues on here.
Yeah.
So do the first one as S. And Will, do you have a button too?
Yes. I'm pressing my button now.
Oh, you are?
Okay.
I'm pressing mine as well.
Okay, do it one at a time.
Okay.
Mine.
Nothing?
Nothing.
But both at once.
Both at once? Oh, so maybe as we get another.
Wait, should I try pressing the third button?
Oh, yeah.
Press all 3 of them.
No.
No.
As escape play progressed, participants navigated the power dynamics of taking on a role that John Hinmarsh and colleagues would call a demonstrator, a position of leadership in social interaction, that at times is constituted by the opening move of a directive sequence, but can be sustained or unmade through the way in which requests from others are responded to, either ratifying or challenging the stance taken by a player proposing to act as the subsequent leader. So in this small snapshot, Walter takes on the role of demonstrator in his act of reading the message that lit up on the piece of art. Middle letter of word for wheel loving rodent. Casey quickly takes over by shouting, "Hamster!" Indeed, she takes up the position as knower with her utterance. Walter, in the next turn, starts spelling HAMSTER. Still puzzled about how to proceed, we see how these identities and epistemic stances of knowing and unknowing are dynamic, and in the space of play are sometimes linked to particular puzzles, tasks, and activities. So if Act 1 and Act 2 illustrated how learning to read the room challenged identities of who could take on the role as a demonstrator or reader-leader, and how reading fluently sometimes only came through productive failure, then Act 3 will showcase how successful reading required recalibration and knowledge transformation.
Middle letter of word for
It's
wheel loving rodent.
It's S.
It's on yellow right now.
S.
But this doesn't correlate to this. This has 4. This has 6. So there's got to be a 4 in here somewhere.
It goes off to these 3.
So that's an S, but what would that have to do with?
I don't know. There's another code somewhere
Every time it was on red.
that we're gonna have to figure out. I know. I'm really frustrated.
Maybe it's just this. What's on there?
Yellow.
Is there anything else from the briefcase?
Oh,
Smash
the
that
button.
like-
Smash it!
Fire Build's installation tracked flowers to mimic the beauty of tableau blue. Maybe we hope to impart a lesson to his audience that only by working together will they be successful.
So it's like one person has to stand over here, one person.
Yeah, we got that part.
But we already knew that.
Can we press anything?
that was not helpful.
I also could like barely hear it.
Sir.
Oh,
What? I did that before. It's mostly just coincidence. Actually, go press.
Oh, you want to press? Oh, wait.
What?
Wait. Oh, you your hand still on it?
Yeah.
Try take it off. All right, put it back on.
Oh yeah, what's that?
What's happening?
It stopped.
it stopped flashing.
when you first took it off.
I'm touching it. You gotta tell me what to do.
All right.
All right, I can like look in
Are you
between.
on it? Or are you not
I
on
can
it?
be the third
Try pressing
person.
the off.
Oh wow, we have not touched these at all. I mean, is there 4 letters that we need to know on that?
I don't know. All right. We need 4 numbers.
What about we haven't?
Could just be red, yellow, blue, green.
Clam, what are you up to?
But I think we got
Clam's not here.
Okay. Everyone named Sam's Clam in my head, okay? Also, I won't see Clam for a whole year. I'm sad.
You're not supposed to move stuff. Oh, wait.
Yeah, I know these. There's
Try moving
definitely.
them all to the same side. You definitely have some sort of mechanism.
Okay. I really want to figure this out.
You go on that side. I'm gonna go over here now.
Okay, okay.
Okay,
Tell me what you're doing. Describe.
I'm
what you're
currently
doing.
pressing
yellow.
the light.
Okay.
It's on yellow.
Oh, this says yellow, and
All right,
this.
it switched to blue.
Okay.
I'm pressing the blue.
That's now green. What if you get that to blue now?
Moved to
oh,
red.
okay. So what was it first? It was yellow then blue together?
Yellow.
That's what you do. Okay.
It went back.
Is this
to blue.
revealing anything?
Wait, it went back to blue?
Yeah. So yellow, blue, red, blue.
Guys, yeah, keep telling me what it is. What is
Try
it?
yellow,
Yellow.
blue, red, blue.
Go back
It's
to
on
yellow.
Okay, now what's it on?
It's on yellow and blue now.
Green. Go to green.
It's on red and blue now.
Purple.
It's on yellow and blue now.
Yellow and blue.
Green.
Yeah.
It's on blue and red.
Purple.
Turn!
It's off.
Woo!
That was a 3-way teamwork. Good job, guys.
So I apologize for the extended clip, but I thought it was necessary that we end on a high note and you actually were able to sort of see success here. So as gameplay progressed, we see how players recalibrate problem solving and play. The top of the clip starts with an unsuccessful attempt at puzzle solving that links to a clue that is then provided by the overheard game master. His clue, both barely audible here and barely audible in the room, acted as a contextualization device. In this initial exchange, we see what Mailander calls a proof procedure. Will, Casey, Sam, and Walter, as interlocutors, display understandings of one another's utterances, thus shifting the proposed interactional sequence. We also, however, can see that Casey, Sam, and Will exhibit varying epistemic stances, each signaling that they recognize the importance of recalibrating action in order to find a subsequent solution. After hearing it, the focus of the scene shifts to Walter, who acts as the go-between of Maddie and Sam. Their actions are mediated both visually with his GoPro camera, but also physically in location. Maddie states, quote, "One person has to stand over here and one person has to stand over there." Another player quickly retorts, quote, "We already knew that." Walter nonetheless takes up the charge with, "I can be the third person." As the interactional sequence continues, this recalibration leads to new ways of acting with and noticing the substrate of the button. This elicits a transformed substrate, which serves as the point of departure for the next action, to be able to recognize the goal of seeing 2 primary colors and recognizing that they together make a secondary color. Similarly here, we see what Mailander refers to as sequentiality, a chain of interactional turns that are built on one another. So through this complex ecology of sign systems and through a trajectory of recalibration, Players are shown sort of to achieve the solution. And together, they were successful in the interactional accomplishment of reading the room. Okay, so what? You may be wondering, what does this have to do with qualitative research? How does this showcase learning? Or you could be scratching your head and asking why I ruined something that looked really, really fun through theoretical jargon about interaction. But for me, this has everything to do with learning. And more importantly, the analytic tools we use to notice knowing across learning environments. So learning to escape, as I attempted to render here, is a reflective act, a situative endeavor in which it is, as all activities are, tied to the social and cultural context in which it occurs. Escape provides an illustrative expression of what Chuck Goodwin would name as cooperative action, an interactional accomplishment wherein by combining resources and substrates, we can understand sort of how these forms are brought into existence across time scales. Reading the room, as we saw, required participants to know not what one another was doing, but also the kinds of knowledge that they held, as well as an understanding of the relevant materials and material infrastructure being put to use by the designers. So in summary, the short, incomplete, and fragmentary episodes featured here, for me and in this larger paper I'm working on, contribute to a deeper understanding of the diverse ways in which individual players may use verbal resources, their bodies, as well as their material environment to accomplish learning to escape as a public and shared activity. Indeed, a trajectory of knowing and interaction. So I know I perhaps spoke really quick. I apologize for that, but I'm super excited to sort of transition now, stop sharing my screen, and engage in what I hope is a really sort of fruitful Q&A. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wargo. I really, really appreciate that. So at the beginning, you mentioned kind of the intersections of the methodologies you've taken up. And so this design was really in-depth and complex. And I was wondering if you could break this down a bit more for us and let us know. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So at my former institution, really sort of a bunch of grad students came together and sort of asked for an independent study around interaction analysis. It was sort of a peripheral reading that they had in one class and didn't have necessarily enough folks to sort of do a real class, but wanted to sort of just form an initial reading group. And so that's sort of how it started. And one of the ways in which I tried to sort of actualize what we were reading about, and we were reading some really out of field stuff. So there's a beautiful piece by John Hinmarsh that looks at how practicing clinical dentists sort of teach others through exhibiting action how to sort of locate some of their instruments in teeth to exhibit knowing to the supervising dentist. We read obviously Jordan and Henderson's piece around interaction analysis, as well as participated in a couple of groups. There's an interaction analysis lab at NYU, as well as in Vanderbilt. So we did a lot of sort of problem sharing and problem knowing with one another, but we wanted to actually ground this in some work and shared data. And so we partnered with this amazing escape room group out in Boston. And they were so, to put it really plainly, down to clown, those were their words. And they allowed us access in spaces that were otherwise, I think I will never have access to again. I mean, we did reach out to a lot of escape rooms that were like, no way, absolutely not. That's, we're worried about sort of the safety and we don't want to be held liable, which we totally get and understand. But what was fascinating for us is that in addition to watching how players moved and interacted across the room, we also got to sort of learn from the engineers and architects of the space how they design the space based on sort of user experience. These rooms go through many, many, many sort of months of beta testing. So it was great for us to sort of see a little bit around that. And then I have to give out big shout outs to former doc students, Alex Corbett and Melita Morales, who are just phenomenal conversation analysts in and of their own right. And they really sort of helped, me sort of see how that type of close attention to conversation allowed us to see some of the more embodied or physical things I was interested in.
Thank you so much. And we've got some questions in the chat, and then someone else has raised their hand. So the first question comes from Emma McMain. It says, I'm curious if you notice things about the group's relations across power dynamics, especially thinking of gender. Were there times when the interlocutors talked over each other, were positioned by the others as knower at the expense of a peer, etc.?
Great, that's such a great question. We did notice that in some rooms there were particular sort of gendered sequences. Walter, whose video we were watching, does like to sort of act as lead demonstrator. He sometimes, just to put it bluntly, mansplains, if you will, what folks should be doing. But what was fascinating for us is that identities about previous players' histories of participation really informed who took the lead. So in the third room that we've written about, sort of in the third room, it's a series of storybook adventures that sort of are all guided by sort of what we may understand as like classic fairy tales. And Casey, who we saw in the scenes presented here today, sort of immediately knew where we were. Oh, we're in the underwater, space of Atlantis. We're in the jungle of the Jungle Book, and she was right. And so these, her prior knowledge really did provide her with a space to act or exhibit sort of knowing or leader in ways that the other group sort of listened to and grabbed onto. So it was definitely sort of gendered at times. I would sort of say that Will and Sam were sort of just hung out. They were sort of very close to the wall at all times. They did sort of perimeter loops. It was really the interaction was between Walter, Casey, and Maddie. So yeah, great question. Absolutely great question.
Yeah, I think as a follow-up question to that, something I was thinking about as you were presenting, I'm wondering how, if at all, your analysis kind of reckoned with kind of the whiteness that is seen as central to gaming, right? A lot of gaming scholarship, and how that factored into the space, like who is allowed access even to escape rooms, right? So just wondered if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I can sort of quickly sort of point to other folks' work. So there is a big sort of venue called EscapeCon. It's sort of what it sounds like. It's a conference of escape room players, designers, architects, and UX designers, user experience designers. And they have actually shown what you're talking about, Shay, sort of this cultural bias that most oftentimes these games are sort of very much built, designed, and sort of configured in the imaginary of whiteness, right? One of the things that I was also really sort of interested in with the sort of specific rooms that we examined were how ableist they were in their design. So in order to sort of escape the room that we sort of previewed today, you had to crawl through a very, very tight sort of crawl space, wherein most bodies, to be quite honest, would have difficulty moving, especially sort of otherly abled bodies, larger folks. Like it is definitely like something that we thought a lot about, and that players also brought up. There were also sort of design features like elements of sound where if you're deaf or hard of hearing, you would sort of not necessarily be clued in to sort of understand how sort of the sounds of this seashell actually were the clue in and of itself. So as sort of a step back, we think a lot about that. But I would definitely sort of point folks to other work who like directly take up that in a more macro scale. Like there's actually a very complete survey of escape rooms that I can send either you or Penny after this.
Thank you for that. Okay, I've gotten a lot of stuff in the chat. So Whitney Johnson says, I'm fairly new to the research in these areas. At the beginning, you mentioned that there are different settings that can be used. If possible at all, how would this type of analysis play out in either a video game space or a virtual reality space?
Yeah, great. So I think in a video game space, I've seen a lot of folks do really cool work on Twitch and Discord to have that simultaneity of sort of the sort of first person like Zoom camera vision of what you would see here as a player, as well as what's on the screen of the video game. Similarly, I know that there's sort of technologies that allow us to understand that side-by-side sort of video of your body moving through VR. I'm thinking here now of like the Oculus or the metaverse sort of VR that provides you with sort of two sort of hand clickers and sort of the larger face mask. But there are sort of technologies that will also record how your body is moving in that space while simultaneously showcasing the you moving through VR. I think one of the most exciting things for me around interaction analysis is to sort of study everyday knowing as consequential sites of learning. And one of the things that, I'll be really honest and say a lot of this work is super new to me, and it came from sort of me going down rabbit holes of reading of sort of the late and great Chuck Goodwin. And Chuck Goodwin had this stance as a researcher that was just to ask, like, what is going on here? And I love that question. And I think it's really actually exciting, especially for someone who spends time in sort of schools, but also out of school. I think that what is happening here is really interesting.
Thank you so much. And I see a hand up from Faye, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I'm still sort of trying to articulate it a little bit, but so I used to work in an escape room, and ours was like sort of further along the spectrum of more sort of narrative or role playing, in that, like, some escape rooms will like
Faye, we can't hear you. Hey, Faye, are you still there?
I think they're coming back now.
Hi, sorry, I just dropped off the meeting. It keeps happening, but the question I had really was like, were you looking at all, or do you know of anybody else who is, at how players were interacting with and around the narrative or the story of the space, and how they were kind of like, because so many of these puzzles are often like also a process of kind of unraveling an environmental story, or a story about the place. And you briefly touched on the fact that an element of the expertise that people would bring was like a familiarity with the stories, or with the genre, and applying that to the puzzles themselves. But I'm curious just about like both whether or how players were kind of got into character or got into the fiction of the place, and how they interacted with that and around that, and yeah, or whether that was an aspect of what you were looking at and how you thought about it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Faye.
Sure.
It's sort of a subsequent paper we're working on right now that looks at sort of play and paratext. So we sort of talk about sort of staging the scene, which all of the escape rooms had, both at the beginning and the ending, as this moment of really critical to your sort of, to use your language, like this immersive experience where folks weren't necessarily going to the extreme of what some would call like LARPing, right? Where sort of they're acting as sort of, a detective. But one of the interesting moments in the design of the room is to sort of have this stage narrative. So I'll provide sort of a quick overview of what the stage narrative is here, is that players are walked through a door and you meet sort of a museum docent who sort of says, I just got fired from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum because something out of their collection was stolen. I hope that doesn't happen here. Boom, fade to black, sirens, red, the three paintings are sort of missing. And they sort of say, oh no, I don't want to get fired again. Please help me find these paintings, but we got to do it quick. You only have 60 minutes. And then she leaves. And that, even though it's minor, players, to your point, Faye, like loved that as sort of an entry point into this world. I don't necessarily know how long that sort of experience lasted. So you sort of hear in the third scene that I presented, a person named Cal. That's actually a close friend of the group that has nothing to do, with play, but was something that they were just talking about naturally in terms of how it came up. Another sort of point that's really interesting is at the end of the first room, it's sort of it's in sort of a dark demons or like detectives lair where there's witchcraft happening, and they have to form hands and like create themselves as like a human chain, from point A to point B. And what actually happened in this was that the design, the actual sort of engineering of the game didn't work. Like it didn't go ta-da, which was sort of the signal that like they had successfully completed. So they started doing like everything. Like maybe we have to sing. Oh, we have to sing. Let's sort of sing because there was like a chant in the earlier clue. Or, oh, maybe we have to like really act like we know what we're doing. And so it was interesting to see how players took up this idea of failure as a reason to maybe replay or recalibrate who they were in the space. But not to sort of continue to blast him, but I want to shout out Alex Corbett has a beautiful piece that just came out in Linguistics and Education that actually talks about how players take up or take off particular identities in live action role playing and world building. And his work is really consequential because he sort of highlights how this does have ramifications for sort of whiteness, anti-blackness, misogynoir, gendered ideas of sort of who is heard in a space. And I would definitely check out his work too, as it more sort of centrally locates in the world of world building. Yeah. He's at SUNY Cortland.
Yeah, thank you. I've been, thank you for that recommendation too. Alex Corbett, it's really cool. Thank you. Great response. I'd be curious to see too, just like how players, even if they're not, like in role in the sense of like in a LARP, how they're talking about or feeling like the stakes, the fictional stakes, of like, oh no, we've got to do this, or etc. Thank you. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so Anna asked about just like the kind of practicality of it. And so wondering, were all participants wearing GoPro cameras? How did you choose which point of view you were analyzing, or have you looked at everyone's point of view?
Yeah, so there is a much larger video where we have sort of created all 5 happening at the same time. As you will probably imagine, it's very difficult to look at. It is no one wants to see that. It is very difficult to look at. So there were a couple of things just in terms of practicality. So Walter's video, who we see here, had the best audio. So for today, I just wanted to sort of present that as a means of accessibility, even though I should have captioned it, so I apologize. But the other things is like in real time, people scratch their head. So in some games, 2 people switched off video and switched on. So GoPro has this other sort of possibility of taking a still photo every second. So we downloaded all of that video and we sort of saw, oh, well, this entire players is just, it's like 3,000 frames of still action, which could be useful, but wasn't necessarily useful for the things we were interested in. But yes, so we have looked at all players' video. We also, as I made mention, listened to all players' audio because, their approximation in space allows them to hear the game designer if a clue is given, where at other points of the room, it's almost inaccessible. We've spent a ton of time. Like I will sort of say that this is one of the, for anyone who does or who has done CA, that is, we know how sort of timely and time intense that is. But even with video, sort of going back and having arguments with one another of like, no, that's not what he was looking at, was really sort of, beneficial. I'll also sort of just quickly say that the video that we were able to generate as part of the behind the scenes also helped with locating place in terms of where folks were. And that allowed us to sort of create these larger timescale maps of like, how long was Walter at puzzle 14? When did he return to it? When was it done? And that allowed us to sort of see also this knowing and interaction across a different time scale.
Thanks so much. I'm starting to make sure I'm not missing any questions. If you do have a question, feel free to unmute or put it in the chat.
I have a follow-up question to that. Is that okay? So I have a question. Hi, John. It's nice to see you.
Molly.
My question is, if you were doing the study again, is there anything you do differently in terms of data construction?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that we were really interested in was sort of the actual movement in space that was not attached to the first person perspective. So if there was a way to get an aerial camera in each corner of the room or in subsequent rooms, I think that would be really helpful. For folks who do interaction analysis work, you'll know that like gaze is really important. And for us, going back into the video each time and to try to like approximate where gaze was from that vantage point was really hard. And right, I will sort of say, working with a larger group of people, the question was like, was it even purposeful? Like, what's the point, John? Like, why are we doing this? So that's one. And I think that the other thing is, I think I saw in the chat too, questions around sort of like, what was sort of the initial impetus for the work. I would love to see how others, what would it look like for 5 strangers who have never met before come together and do this room, or a family, right, that has sort of this different dynamics. I think that one of the sort of who behind Escape is really, really important. I also would love, and this is sort of a project that Alex and I are thinking about doing, is sort of looking across sort of the different environments of escape rooms. So there is a really big live tabletop version coming out soon of an escape room by Spectre and Vox out of the UK. So we were interested in looking about, like, we have data for folks who are in the room. What does it look like to escape at the table? And then to sort of the previous question's point, through the screen, right? So there is an escape room that is all VR oriented. And I would love to sort of trace what that interaction looks like, especially because it's so, individual and isolated. But yeah, like any study, there's a ton of stuff I wish we could do over, but
Well, yeah, and I was thinking, I hear you saying what else you would like collect and or construct and what else you would want to look at, but I was wondering if there was any place where it felt like, oh, we just got too much here. Like it was like, if I were doing it again, I wouldn't do it every 2 seconds. I'd do it every 10 seconds. Or,
oh yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Like sometimes I get
yes.
place in studies, and I just wondered if you had.
Yes. Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, I mean, I will say, I'll also a big shout out to Joseph Madres, who was the person who did that 2-second timestamp. And people were like checking in. They're like, Joe, where are you? And he's like, well, I have 3 minutes done this week. Right. And we were like, yeah, 3 minutes. Right. So, I mean, it took him well over a year sort of to do that work. So I will also sort of say it's very time consuming. But selfishly, as an advisor, this is a data corpus that we've created together. So it like provides us an opportunity to hang out with one another on Zoom and like collaborate still. And I love that. So that, yeah, we do have too much, but selfishly, I'm like, I'm glad, I'm grateful.
Good. Thank you. I'm glad for you.
All right, before we wrap up, we had one more question. I'm trying to find it in chat. Okay, so this is from Ramya, who asked, what are your thoughts in using escape rooms to have conversations of culture and knowing with customized rooms reflective of the players versus more general ways of knowing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll also sort of briefly highlight, I want to shout out Scott Nicholson's book, Unlocking the Room. It's a book that is very, I don't know if that's the right title. I know unlocking is the first word, but Scott Nicholson, great guy up in Canada. But his work looks at what is this sort of, how might we create these conditions and environments in classroom spaces using sort of the resources and funds of knowledge of students to sort of otherwise complicate escape. I mean, one of the things that sort of felt a little bit sort of difficult at times was Antero Garcia and I wrote a paper sort of at the start of the pandemic about some of this data, given his background and interest in sort of the power and politics of gaming. And one of the things that we felt sort of, we had like an out-of-body reaction to is that it was in the middle of COVID. It was in the sort of the middle of the pandemic, wherein escape was of mind, right? And especially asking who could escape, right? What are the politics of escape? So I think, Ramya, like to your point, yes, like I'll point both to Penny and to Shay. I'll send some links to other work that sort of looks at sort of the sort of cultural dimensions. It is a really interesting fact, though, that the first escape room ever was actually in Kyoto, Japan. And so it operated from a very different vantage point that is not as sort of competitive, right? And it's sort of this sort of centered on sort of winning, but rather on sort of a space of pause and reflection and immersion. Similarly, there are some very, very legit scary escape rooms. For example, there's one in Spain where the first clue is you are locked in a tomb, and in the complete darkness have to unlock yourself out of that tomb. No thanks, that's not for me. But again, I think it plays with genre, it plays with fear. I mean, it does play with elements that I think are race, class, gendered, able, right, and all of those elements for sure. So again, I'm happy to share links and super excited to talk more at length if you want to shoot me an email or follow up for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to do something, and I've actually used Scott Nicholson's work and I've seen him speak, so I think he's a great resource as well. I'm a PhD student, so a part of my work has been looking at play and trying to advocate for playful evaluation to exist in the field. So I'm using escape rooms because I've been a part of a few to explain and yeah, so I'd love to chat more offline if you're interested. But using more like of a cultural focus and digital escape rooms versus like physical ones.
Cool. And I just want to quickly shout out, because I know we're at time, but I want to shout out Aaron Trammell's work around a Black phenomenology of play. Aaron sort of talks at length about sort of the textured phenomenology that players of color experience in any sort of forms of play. Play we know has a politics. But okay, I'll stop.
All right, let's close this out. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully I can do it the right way. All right, so thank you so much, Dr. Wargo, for being here and being in conversation with us. If you want to learn more from Dr. Wargo, there are two articles you should check out. The first one is Wargo and Garcia, Rereading the Room, The Literacies of Escape Rooms, and the second is Wargo et al., Sounding Escape, Examining the Sonic Contours of Play and Story in the Author's Enigma. And so with that, please do stay connected with the QualLab. We are online, we're on Twitter or X. This conversation and almost all of our QualLab lunch recordings are going to be on our YouTube page. And so feel free to find us on YouTube and subscribe so you can rewatch this and then all of the other dynamic lectures we've had. If you would like to connect with us directly, feel free to email us at quallab@osu.edu. Thank you so much for joining us this year for QualLab lunches, and we will see you in the fall.
Thank you so much.